The Chronicle of Poland by Gallus Anonymous is the oldest document describing the history of the entity from which modern Poland emerged. However, it is not a chronicle, it's not written in Polish, nor by a Pole. Its author is known mainly for being unknown. The book was created for higher purposes. Bolesław Krzywusti, in an effort to gain popularity, commissioned a book praising his bravery, valor, and nobility, qualities that were doubted after he killed his brother. In the preface, Gallus Anonymous praised his illustrious patrons, extolling the virtues of their minds in a hyper-fawning manner, concluding with a note requesting that the invoice for the work be paid. This footnote casts an entirely different light on the first part of the preface. Returning to the overview. The Chronicle was most likely created between 1113 and 1116, over 150 years after the baptism of Poland and its entry into the sphere of Latin culture, the contemporary European Union. Considering that generations changed every 2 decades, nearly 8 generations had passed within Christian structures, or rather 7, subtracting the right wing's rise to power during the so-called pagan reaction. I'll repeat it once more. 7 generations in Latin culture, universities did not yet exist in Polish lands, but one could expect that literature would develop to a decent level in a few centers or in a few minds. Returning to the letter in the introduction to the Chronicle, those bright individuals leading spiritual life couldn't match the writing skill of the wandering ghostwriter known as Gallus, or more likely they were high-ranking fools who mess up whatever they touch. Let's look again at Gallus's dedication from this perspective, and consider whether Gallus mocked the dullness of his employers. I think it is highly likely that the noble bishops did not even register a hint of irony in the praises to themselves. At the very beginning of the Chronicle text, we have a passage about the great deeds of rulers, which due to reluctance and neglect, or perhaps due to a lack of learned people, remain silent. The author almost directly refers to the dullness of his employers, but for appearances includes them as authors of the work, because he writes in the plural, a masterpiece. Not only Poles were capable of outsmarting an astute censor, oh no. Let's return to the reasons for the creation of the Chronicle. Krzywusti has poor public relations. Someone advised him to improve his image, hire a scribe and weave the story of your life into something bigger. At the same time, our state will gain some likes. He heard it, and he did it. They recruited a Frenchman who hastily wrote a chronicle full of clichés and worn-out phrases, relying on oral accounts of bishops for factual information to avoid complete detachment from reality. It somewhat resembles running a fan page and posting stock photos and dull descriptions in the style of youth from 20 years ago. But we were awesome. The creation of the Chronicle and its dubious literary value document a certain mechanism that will always be present in Poland: the importation of second-rate washed-up intellectuals or footballers who dazzle the locals with their artistry and sophistication. Of course, most will defend its artistic level with the principle of priority, but that's a poor excuse. Livy, Tacitus, Herodotus, to name just a few, set certain standards against which Gaul's mediocrity pales. The narrative is fragmented, illogical at times, but deadlines were pressing. You know how it is, boss, prince, just write, the audience is waiting. Bruckner plainly states that if we compare Gaul's chronicle with contemporary chronicles of Rus and Czech, in terms of factual accuracy, Gaul falls short. Let's finally move on to the content. The Chronicle begins with a description of the location of the land of the Poles. What known reference points does the wandering monk use? In short, he says, if you're traveling from Europe to Kiev, get off A4 at Sosnowiec, because the land of the Poles is known to few except those who pass through to trade with the Rus. What does this mean? Well, it means we were a transit country in the 12th century. Alright, but what's so special about this country? Well, a country with healthy air, fertile land, honey-flowing forests, Fish-filled waters, warrior knights, hard-working peasants, enduring horses, willing oxen for ploughing, milking cows, woolly sheep. Sounds familiar. It's missing. Clucking hens, earthy land, and human people. Gol had no clue about the Polish country. He was driving with clichés like the political programs of Polish parties. Strong family, innovative companies, strong Poland. Or the second option. This country didn't stand out in the Middle Ages. No crafts, significant secular or sacred buildings, just forests with inhabited clearings. And the wealth that Chrobry could boast of came from trading for a pack of pipes with Slavic comrades. He was a slave trader, but that information doesn't sell well, so it was cut out. Moving on. The myth of Piast receiving mysterious visitors expelled from their abode by Popiel turns out to be a plagiarism of the legend of Saint-Germain. In many places in the Chronicle we can see that the lack of erudition and refinement of the bright bishops led Gol to write, as we have known for centuries, by the copy-paste method. For example, Chrobry had a council of 12 knights with whom he dined. Was it a round table? Well, here it's a bit ripped off. The chronicler describes the youth of subsequent Polish rulers using the same pattern. All brave, not prone to idle pastimes, hard-working, dedicated to the homeland since youth, gaining great fame and knightly renown. Simply a model of scouts, and in their free time, they sat on tractors and helped peasants with harvest. The whole world envied us such rulers, and that's precisely why almost all chronicles are silent about them. Oh, apologies. Krzywousty appears in the Chronicle of Neighbours, called a foolish prince. Gol has an answer up his sleeve. He inserted the myth of the Golden Age, which he smuggled in during the Gniezno Congress. At that time, gold was so common that, believing Gol, Germany's wealth to this day comes from the gifts Otto III received in Gniezno. Here's a sample of Gol's realism. Gold in his time was as common to all as silver, and silver was as cheap as straw. And the berries in the Krezi were as big as cows. And what did Chrobry get in return? Otto gave a nail, a spear, and permission for coronation. So, as always, a counterfeit second-rate prop, outdated weaponry, and a promise with no backing. That was how it was supposed to be forever, and the Poles were and are satisfied with it. A weak deal paid for disproportionately high cost. Chrobry was therefore the first practitioner of the principle. Stand up and pawn yourself, and you can be sure that you'll gain nothing and they'll take you for a fool. He couldn't take a loan, so after the Congress, he set off to Rus, so that it would be enough for the first again. On his return, he plundered countless thousands of warriors, whose blood turned the Bug River into a flowing river of blood. The commissioner was to enjoy special protection from God since childhood. He was born through the intercession of Saint Idzi, and the Creator's protection was not prolonged, as his mother died shortly after giving birth, but the chronicler does not mention this. Krzywousty was exceptional from childhood. He couldn't even mount a horse, yet he was already leading war expeditions, without his father's knowledge. And the fjords ate from his hand. Bolesław's great deeds seem rather prosaic for a hero. One of the reasons for his glory is that he killed a wild boar, despite allegedly being interfered with by another warrior who supposedly wanted to stop him. We don't know anything more about this situation, as the chronicle sometimes jumps illogically, like a ball in a Polish league football match. And these narrative somersaults don't arise from the fact that the chronicle is flawed. There are no grounds for that. Zbigniew and Bolesław, two brothers, were to rule a divided state together, but their ambitions didn't allow for symbiosis, so they went at each other. Finally, Zbigniew got a beating, because it's known that Zbigniew is a loser and he went for help to Henry Fürwirth the German. They achieved nothing together, and in the end Zbigniew made a deal with Bolesław. The former was to be a mere vassal. Zbigniew returned, but somehow Bolesław blinded him, and then Zbigniew died, with accompanying illnesses, meaning that bleeding accompanied the blinding. That's fate for you, with a crown in the background. But the PR didn't work out well. After all, it was royal blood. So they launched propaganda, and it turned out that suddenly, on his deathbed, the father declared that anyone seeking help from foreign courts is unworthy of being a ruler. Was this statement put into the father's mouth? There's no evidence, because as Gall wrote, we had only illiterate fools at the court. So who would attest to this in writing? Some sentences cause pain with their naive distortion of reality, and no traveller or worker hid their oxen or sheep during his marches, but the poor and the rich joyfully greeted the passerby, and the whole country hurried to see him. Sure, they laid themselves at his feet and wept with happiness that he deigned to come with his entourage and consume whole their supplies. Besides that, he patted his wife on the backside and gave candy to a child when he could have killed them. The true communism. Stalin probably wouldn't have put it better. Gall's Chronicle is devoid of psychology, as befits medieval literature, but at times the chronicler verges on even greater absurdity when he commands German warriors to sing a hymn in honor of Bolesław. No army would ever allow such demoralization. One can acknowledge their failure, but I've never heard in history of soldiers singing praises to the determination of their enemy's leader, let alone in song. This is a poorly constructed propaganda straight from Russia today. In a fragment about the expedition to the Pomorzans, Gall repeats 4 times that Bolesław achieved more with a smaller army than Zbigniew with a larger one, in just 2 pages, then states that with a small unit, he reached the gate of the stronghold. He didn't conquer the stronghold, but he reached the gate. I hope that gate was at least nice, and he could have posted it on Instastory. Gall was a literary mistress, and he mentions this multiple times in his work. Let the conclusion be the beginning of the work, in which Gall asks his employers to ensure that they will pay the invoice along with the VAT. If Bolesław was so righteous and good, then why did the author include such an address? Could it be that he still feared being left with nothing? Did his fear come true? Many researchers claim it did, but there is no certainty. One thing is certain, the Chronicle is worth reading as the first Polish work of propaganda.